Well, it has been a quiet week in Washington, D.C., out there on the edge of the country. The midterm elections for 2018 came and went, bringing not so much a blue wave as a light mist, followed by the refreshing scent of lemon. As if the more optimistic of us held, for one fleeting night, that the rules would once again apply, and that fairness would once again be something we all believed in. It's a great night for drinkers on election evening, night, early morning, painful dawn, and regrettable light of day after you wake up in a pool of your own vomit in your car. And you might think you could identify those people, but I would contend that they probably don't look any different from any of us after being hit in the face with disappointment on the evening of November 6th. It was like amateur surgery. Not watching it, but actually being in it. Which is probably why Sherry Finn was standing outside of Freedom Fried. Best fries on all the 7 planes of realness. You might think that working in a bar in a political town on election evening, you'd be too busy for politics because, oh right, you also run the place on top of that. You might think that the recent loss of her sister and inflicted guardianship of her nephew would have kept her mind off of politics. But every TV in that bar was set on the big 3 stations. All night long. CNN, Fox News, and ESPN2. It was in the package, and every time you try to turn it off, there's that one guy who insists he's watching, and every word on every set of lips was focused on the wave, the blue wave. Some heard the blue tsunami. Some heard the blue tornado. And then came along that one person and then another who claimed that it was considered inappropriate to refer to someone as a tornado. People in the Midwest might take offense. Hurricanes, nobody has an issue with. Earthquakes are nothing. But those tornado folk, well, they take things very seriously. It's not a joke. She saw Old Herbert outside. Old Herbert. Blake had actually left Sherry with instructions regarding Old Herbert, though the idiot couldn't have left the key to the safe, sure, who would need that? His instructions for Old Herbert, along with his instructions about most everything, were drawn on the ludicrously large chalkboard Blake had hung some years ago. He'd hung the chalkboard after writing his list of great perfection, 63 rules for life and living, which probably didn't include anything about going to Las Vegas right when there's a terrible shooting and getting yourself and your wife killed. And the number 6 rule, rule number 6, read, Old Herbert is family. Old Herbert is family. Nobody knew what that meant. Sherry didn't know. She asked Bob. He didn't know. She asked the other servers and bussers. She asked the janitorial service that came in twice a week. Most weeks. When Blake could swing it. And now that Blake was gone, well, eventually, Sherry had to decide for herself what Blake's words meant, which meant that Sean wasn't Sherry's only responsibility. She couldn't put old Herbert up, but she could hire him on as security. Ish. A sort of performance art that gives you that feeling of seeing a security guard. So real, you could almost touch him. But then you realize that he's homeless and that he smells weird. Old Herbert was born in a different time, and his head ain't right. Most days, he sits out on the sagging remains of what was once considered, sometime in the 1970s, to be a bench. And he smokes off-brand cigarettes. And being the security guard at Freedom Fried, everybody knows him. And everybody looks out for him. Well, most people. Well, at least they don't hit him. And that's nice, right? We all have our own way of dealing with the homeless. Some of us donate food. Some give spare change. In my town, we had a measure on the ballot to control the price of rent. But instead, the town elected a new mayor whose only plan for the homeless was to lock them up. What he and his supporters, who treated their plan as such great punishment for the poor, didn't realize was that this gave a new home and regular meals to about 50 homeless. That's all they had room for. And this all cost far more to the taxpayers than regulating such a thing as rent. But the developers didn't have to pay, or have homeless people staying at their motels. So it was considered an equitable solution, just so long as you didn't think too much. Sherry sat down next to old Herbert on the remnants of that bench. He did smell funny. She knew he had a room, and she'd gifted him a jumbo pack of ivory soap bars. But it wasn't soap she smelled. And it wasn't body odor. But it was pungent. And anything in the general vicinity of Sherry's mind made a quick retreat as Sherry realized old Herbert was smoking very off-brand cigarettes. Old Herbert looked up at her and said, "Oh, hey. Oh, how you doing, Miss Sherry?" Nobody really understands what the deal is with old Herbert's voice. Sherry tapped on old Herbert's arm, and he brought his pipe up out of his coat to share. I should probably mention that marijuana is legal in the District of Columbia. You can have it on you out in the open. The federal government tried to stop this from happening, but Washingtonians found a way to do it anyway. Old Herbert didn't have to hide his smoke. He was just being old Herbert. Oh, hey, let me light you. Let me light that up, yo. Let me, Old Herbert can get to be pretty much. He's as ludicrous a sight here in D.C. as he is in many other cities where he appears. Because a lot of cities have a few copies of this guy hanging around. With nearly 8 billion people on the planet, you're going to get some duplicates. And this model of middle-aged, mentally unstable homeless guy has really been around for over a century, if you think about it. So, you got to give him a little slack. Which is what Sherry was trying to do as old Herbert comically moved the lighter flame further and further out of her reach. She took a long, hot drag that mixed with the cool night air, and she was sorry she hadn't taken a beer outside with her. In a plastic cup, of course. A covered plastic cup. She looked down at the almost suburbanness of their street, lit by not nearly enough streetlights out there in the dark, and was certain her bar would barely break even. She wondered if she should sell and get out now. She knew that her problem wasn't if she believed in herself or not, but how acutely aware she was of her inability to live up to the tasks now before her. Crazy night. I'm saying it was a crazy night. Wasn't it, Miss Sherry? Old Herbert asked out of nowhere. And Sherry looked over at him, at the wild hairs in his unkempt beard that formed a kind of cloud around his face, and all of the gray in his hair and the wrinkles on his face that, Wait. Hold on. Was it because it was dark out, or could it be that old Herbert wasn't really that old after all? Sherry told him, "Please stop calling me Miss Sherry. I sound like I run a brothel. And yes, it's been a hell of a night, right? Old Herbert? How have you been?" "Well, you know," Old Herbert said in that way that makes it clear that you are now stuck there. There's no polite way out of, "well, you know," when you've literally asked for it. It's like a dare. "Well, you know," Old Herbert said. I believed them. I believed them all. And perhaps that's on me. Perhaps I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have known better than to hope. Perhaps I should have admitted to myself on that bleak inauguration day in 2016. And before every bleak day since then, I should have admitted to myself that this would not be a redemption easily won. You know, it's worse that he didn't win. If he had won, if he had really won, then I could say my fellow Americans are evil, terrible, cruel people. But he didn't win. He was handed that presidency. And what a pretty thing it was. All set up for a lady. Which meant that my fellow Americans just let him take it. Just let him steal it like it was a chicken ready to be ate up. And I'm no one to claim innocence either. I'm just as bad as the rest of you. I let it happen too. And then I saw the excitement on the streets and on your TVs and that. And I heard about a blue wave. And I believe them. You know, Miss Sherry? Just Sherry. I believed them. And then Andrew Gillum gave his concession speech. A man who clearly loved his state and his country, who lost to a man whose only qualification was that he would bow to Trump That's the kind of candidate who won. That guy. The guy who doesn't care about anybody. Doesn't care about anyone. He just wants that check. And Andrew Gillum delivered the concession speech. How is that even possible? Listen, old Herbert, Sherry tried to say. And then we lost Beto O'Rourke, an articulate young man whose depth of thought and dedication to the values of this nation put his opponent to whatever passes for shame in the Republican Party. And it was Beto O'Rourke who delivered the concession speech that night. And I thought, how is that even possible? No person on this planet likes his opponent. Not one person. How did he get a single vote? And still, Beto delivered the concession speech. And I would go in, and I'd go inside, and I'd drink maybe half a beer. Bob sometimes gives me half a beer on a cold night. So I tell him I'm cold, and he gives me half a beer, and I shouldn't be saying this to you, should I? Here, have another hit. Old Herbert gave Sherry another hit, but Sherry wasn't fooled. And anyway, she told Bob what he could give Old Herbert. Old Herbert was a special case. He was actually upstanding, polite to a fault, considerate, never rude or cruel. He just couldn't handle things. Mostly when you wish he would. There were times when the most common action would startle him, especially his own. He was broken. And he knew he was broken. And at present, the best he appeared able to do was simply go on living. Sherry sneaked a third hit after taking that second hit and said, "Okay." Old Herbert replied, and I watched as the announcement was made that the Democrats would control the House of Representatives. As if that was some great victory. As if we didn't need much more. And that this outcome was somehow, was magically more than enough to check Trump. But you know, it's far from that. It only shines a light on Trump. Which would be fine if Trump was capable of shame, but he bled out the last of his shame sometime in the late 1960s. It wasn't pretty. And I sat and I watched Nicole Wallace and I took in her beauty. I'm sorry if I sound all of a sudden poetic, but when you fall in love as quickly as I do, you just know, And I knew I was in love. I was in love as deeply, profoundly, mysteriously in love with Nicole Wallace, with her elvish features and her auburn hair. Yes, I know she worked for the Republic. I know she, oh my God, I know. But she's just so cute. I want to sit with her. You know, I just want to sit with her. I don't want her for any sexual deviancies of any kind. My love is pure. My love is so pure. I simply want to sit beside her and hold her hand. Our legs hanging over the edge of our treehouse, just dangling there as we watch the sunset. And maybe in a moment of quiet surrender, she leans her head onto my shoulder. And maybe she kisses my cheek. And we're only 9 years old. I'm not fit to raise a child, Old Herbert, Sherry said, as if to stop the oncoming train of Old Herbert's rather bizarre fantasy. I try to talk to the kid, but I can't get a straight answer. I only get the most cursory idea of his schedule. Should I be at the school at this time, or should I? It's the state of our nation, Old Herbert interjected. And the porn, Sherry continued. I can hear it on his phone. I can hear it. Do you understand? I'm eating breakfast, calling him to come downstairs. I'm living in their house, in my sister and brother-in-law's house. I'm actually sleeping in their bed. Still. It's creepy. And I can hear him. Upstairs. I can hear his porn from upstairs. It's the state of our nation, Old Herbert repeated. Sherry gave him a long look. She was almost offended when he wouldn't return her stare. The state of our nation has to do with morning wanks? She asked him. He looked at her. The state of our nation is simply that we have given up. We've given up on each other. We cling so closely to our identities, our identity politics, our demographic. We keep forgetting that we are the other guy. Why should we give a damn about the other guy? Because we are the other guy. Old Herbert raised his hand while he took a dramatic pause in order to fart. Gillum lost. O'Rourke lost. Stacey Abrams. So many candidates who represented our highest ideals. They all lost. This idea that somehow we are each to think not just of ourselves, but to extend into our worldviews the fact that there are others as well, it just hasn't sunk in. It should have sunk in. By this time in human development, you might think it would have sunk in. Sherry whispered, Old Herbert. And he looked at her. And he said, You know what I'm talking about, Miss Sherry. Because you took me in. You took in Sean. And I've met Sean. Sean's a little shit. He's a no-good kid who sees this here. He banged his head like a coconut. He thinks this is a handicap somehow. But everything is a handicap, you see, which means that nothing is a handicap. And I know it's got to be hard for you, Miss Sherry. You better believe I know. I've lived a life before this one. A full life. A life with friends. And a family. I guess. Blake dug me up after all that came crashing down. He didn't have to do that. He recognizes this. This here. He pointed back and forth between them. This makes us stronger, together, not apart. People aren't meant to be apart. Our society creates these amazing tools to keep us apart, but that doesn't make us better. And that's the only thing that's going to heal us as a nation, as a people, as a world. And I gotta go. And with that, Old Herbert rose preposterously off from his bench. With his tall, lanky body and overcoat, he could have easily passed for a detective. Or a pervert. Or perhaps a pervert detective. Sherry remained on her bench and watched Old Herbert dash off, almost running. She didn't know what was going on, and somehow she doubted he knew either. She felt Old Herbert's weed take the edge off of her night. She knew that Bob would be closing up inside, and then the two of them would make their bank drop before heading home, where she would almost certainly hear the gasping overacting of porn starlets or amateur housewives or, God forbid, anything from Asia bleeding through the walls and into her bedroom, where she would be unable to sleep for certainly no more than a few hours before having to start with Sean again the following morning. She wondered if there were any government programs made for people of her demographic, small business owning women who were also very recently given custody of a teenager. And then she realized she forgot to vote. And that's it from DC, as with the rest of the world. Is it really our country? Is it really our world? I don't know. But for a little while, that's how it was. At least, until it wasn't. This is Ken LaSalle, and I just wanted to thank you for stopping by for this episode of DC Home. For more information about myself and the work I do, I invite you to take a look at my website at kenlasalle.com. You can also find my work on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and anywhere you find books and audiobooks available online. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching my name, Ken LaSalle. And thank you, as always, for your support.